The Harry Potter film franchise overall is a surprisingly faithful adaptation of the books, but that doesn't mean that there aren't some changes, some which don't always sit too well for fans. Cough, why did you make Ron comedic relief, you jerks? Cough. Today we're talking about something a little less frustrating, but nonetheless kind of bewildering at times. The Forbidden Forest, and the scenes therein that were cut or changed for the films.
No alternative.
So let's start with, well, the start. In the film Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Philosopher's Stone, for all you international viewers who can appreciate the excitement inherent in the word philosopher and don't need images of Mickey Mouse and an army of brooms in your noggin, Harry starts his eavesdropping career when he bumps into Professors Quirrell and Snape, having a conversation.
You don't want me as your enemy, Quirrell.
Considering he only caught the tail end of the conversation, he obviously missed a lot of context, and he definitely came out of that with the wrong idea. This was changed from the books, wherein Harry followed Snape and Quirrell on his broom after a Quidditch match, like some kind of Kiki's delivery service on Rogue Nation's spycraft thingy. I don't know where I'm going with this. Anyway, maybe the filmmakers felt that someone would have noticed an 11-year-old flying around over the Forbidden Forest and changed the location of the interaction, but man, it just would have been so much cooler to see janky CGI spycraft, Children's Fantasy Edition. The Forbidden Forest detention scene in Sorcerer's Stone had a few alterations when it made the jump to the big screen. In the books, the detention foursome were Harry, Hermione, Malfoy, and Neville. Malfoy and Neville were initially partnered up, but after Malfoy purposefully scared Neville and called for help as a joke, Hagrid paired up Harry and Malfoy, which certainly doesn't set up any conflict whatsoever. The movie version cuts Neville out of the picture entirely and replaces him with Ron. Hagrid pairs up Harry and Malfoy from the start, so there's no time for pranks or other general forest shenanigans, thereby saving time and creating a far more economical screenplay. Things of course go awry in both book and film, however, there are differences there too, which leads us to when Harry and Malfoy are met with something terrifying in the Forbidden Forest. Malfoy hightails it out of there in both book and film, and Harry is saved by Firenze the Centaur in both versions. The big difference is the fact that the movie leaves out the other centaurs that come to investigate what had happened, presumably because the budget for attaching human torsos to horse bodies and puppeteering them around was simply not there this early in the production. The interaction with the other centaurs starts laying the groundwork for more centaur versus human interactions that appear in later books, but are largely glossed over in the films. Presumably this later ignoring of super cool half-man, half-horse bloodletting was because, I don't know, PETA? But also, like, Firenze never shows up again, and that's too bad because he's a teacher in Order of the Phoenix, and all the girls are crushing on him, and I'm like, seems like kind of traumatic Equus type stuff that my boss is informing me that I need to stop talking about puppeteering horse corpses and the teen girls who love them in this family-friendly Harry Potter video, so I'm gonna move on now. Poor Charlie Weasley. The second oldest Weasley child is only officially seen once in the entire film franchise, despite having arguably the coolest job. We meet Charlie properly for the first time in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the book version that is. In the scene where Hagrid sneaks Harry out to see the dragons to prepare for the first task, Charlie is supposed to be present as dragons are totally his jam, yo. The film omits him from this scene, and like every other small moment the books provide, so our only glimpse of him in all of the films is the Weasley's family photo in Prisoner of Azkaban. There is this redheaded bloke, which is British for dude per my last Duolingo lesson, but he's not credited as Charlie. Still, the haircut matches how he's described in the book, and he does have a friendship with Tonks, so maybe. Either which way, dude's one of the more interesting Weasley siblings, something that Film Ron and Film Ginny make all too easy. Darn you, Steve Kloves! At least we get a fair bit of Bill Weasley, and Bill, well, there's no other word for Bill. He's cool. Speaking of characters getting cut out of Forbidden Forest scenes in Goblet of Fire, Barty Crouch Sr. is definitely worth a mention. In the book, Harry and Victor Krum are at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, talking about Hermione when Barty Crouch Sr. appears after being out of the picture for several months due to a mysterious illness. When Harry returns with help, Krum has been stunned, and Crouch is nowhere to be found. This scene never happens in the movie. Instead, what we get is a brief interaction between Crouch Sr. and Harry following the second task, which is interrupted by Moody disguised as Barty Crouch Jr. Wait, no. It's Barty Crouch Jr. disguised as Moody. There we go. Let's keep going. Who, of course, has a bit of a tick that gives his game away to his father, who is later found dead. This is a massive oversimplification of Crouch Sr.'s role in the book, wherein not only is he much more hard-edged, he doesn't even show remorse for his son's imprisonment in Azkaban, which, like, dang, bro. But also, he's more complicated, going so far as to use Polyjuice Potion to switch his own wife out for his son, the former of whom winds up dying in Azkaban. Jeez. Yo, Barty Crouch Sr. is just a lot in the book, and while it would have been cool to see, it's easy to understand why his prominent role was cut down so significantly. This is a franchise about a boy wizard after all, not the family tragedy of a magical bureaucrat. Now, while this next scene isn't necessarily played out in full in the books, it's still a pretty significant change from page to screen. In Goblet of Fire, book version, Barty Crouch Jr. reveals the truth of what happened in the previous entry. After running into Harry, who was looking for help, Crouch Jr. went out under the guise of assistance to where Krum was waiting with Crouch Sr. Crouch Jr., disguised as Professor Moody, stunned Krum, murdered his father, transformed his father's body into a bone, and then buried that bone in Hagrid's garden. As I said previously, it's the whole Crouch family drama is just a lot. In the movie, Harry just finds Crouch Sr.'s body, a little less metal, but probably a bit more family-friendly. Also easier to explain. Moving on, it's no secret that Dolores Umbridge is just the worst. There obviously wasn't time to include all of her meddling in the movies, but it's still a bummer that her inspection of Hagrid's class was cut. In the book, she shows up while Hagrid has the class in the Forbidden Forest to learn about Thestrals. The Slytherins are overcome with joy at how poorly she treats Hagrid, while Hermione is absolutely seething. All in all, the scene works well to continue building her up as a villain by having her bully our beloved Hagrid. In the movie, Hagrid is spared her intrusion, at least for the lesson, which is a real shame considering how much Imelda Staunton would have knocked that scene out of the park, y'all. Hashtag release the Umbridged cut. In Order of the Phoenix, Hagrid's baby brother Grawp is introduced. There are a few key differences in his book introduction from his big debut on the silver screen. For starters, the book just has Harry and Hermione going with Hagrid to meet Grawp to take over responsibility for him if and when Hagrid gets fired. The movie adds Ron into the mix to be jealous of a giant giving Hermione a bike bell, I guess? Oh boy, this is normally where I'd go into a borderline radicalized rant about screenwriter Steve Kloves and his frustrating need to write Harry Hermione fanfiction, but luckily we already have a video on his cinema crimes. Oh, and Grawp becomes the center of an argument between Hagrid and Centaurs in the book, which in turn leads to Hermione's realization that they should lead Umbridge into the forest. During the argument, the Centaurs mention that they won't hurt students, but will be more than happy to layeth the smackdown on the adults. In the movie, she presumably figures this out when Hagrid says the Centaurs are upset with the Ministry. This still happens in the Forbidden Forest, but it's worth noting as a small but significant difference in storytelling. Speaking of Hagrid, the Big Galook is notorious for letting information slip, which is why it made perfect sense in Half-Blood Prince for him to share with Harry that he overheard Dumbledore and Snape arguing in the Forbidden Forest. In true dramatic fashion, Hagrid didn't actually get any of the details, so the situation was misinterpreted until the truth came out in Deathly Hallows. The movie changes the location to the Astronomy Tower and cuts Hagrid out completely. Harry overhears the end of Snape and Dumbledore's tense conversation, and thus the misunderstanding is simplified and made more tense and cinematic. Still, it would have been cool to have it take place in the Forbidden Forest. That place be creepy, y'all. Finally, let's end where we naturally must, with the death of Harry Potter. While the scene in Deathly Hallows where Harry uses the Resurrection Stone and is killed by Lord Voldemort is similar in both film and book, there are a few differences. In the books, Remus and Sirius appear to Harry as younger, happier versions of themselves. The Death Eater encampment is also a little different in the book. In the books, there's a fire, and the implication is that there are many more Death Eaters than there are shown in the movie. The film also leaves out Nagini floating in her protective bubble, which is the biggest travesty of all if we're being honest here. Heck guys, the merchandising basically licenses itself on that one. Nagini snow globes, Nagini Christmas ornaments, Nagini pool toys? Just give me some Nagini merch. And that's that, another Harry Potter video in the books. Well, you know what I mean. Fun fact, the Forbidden Forest, as described in the books, is uncharted, meaning there's a lot to it no one knows about, which, maybe come up with a cartography spell, guys.